Hello everyone. How are you? Hope you're doing well. I just realized I wanted to potentially hide my big reveal. Actually, no I don't, because you've already seen it, the thumbnail if you clicked it. So let's just get into this. Hope you guys are having a good day. I have been doing well, I suppose. Been swamped with a bunch of different scripts, so it's been difficult for me to know really how to spend my time. But one thing I realized is that I probably need some help talking through all this stuff relating to Krasnacht so that I can make sure that I do a proper job. It's also been a while since I played Kaiserreich, so I wanted to make sure there's elements of Kaiserreich that I remembered to properly do. Hi Random Brett. Hi everyone. Stream starting at 3 a.m. Yeah. Unfortunately, there's just some things I can't really prevent. My time zone seems to be really isolated from the rest of the world, all the way really far away from Europe. I'm close to Asia, but then if I do it in the morning, which works best for me and my family, then they won't be able to tune in while it's live. But then when it's nighttime, the same problem happens. Yeah, I can turn the music down. Thanks. Is that better? That sort of feedback really helps make the stream better. Or is it that my microphone isn't nearly high? I don't know what Krasnacht means. I know that night means Nacht. So Kras, I don't know what Kras means. Looks like 3 a.m. Oh, I see. Yeah, I turned it down a little bit. Okay, that's good. All right. Oh, it does? Oh, okay. Interesting. Okay. Yeah. I like that font a lot, even if it's faux Cyrillic. Okay, but let's get into it. So, as far as I remember, basically every Krasnacht timeline, except for maybe Krasnacht itself, actually, at one point anyway, has Japan subjugating China through their puppet government. And then, obviously, this means that there's like some socialist civil war, right? And then that plays well if you have a socialist India, especially if they don't start off with Burma, but then they get Burma later. Yeah, I think that's right. Red Knight. Hi, Amish. But my question is, why do we need a third? Why do we need a tripolar Cold War? I get that tripolar Cold Wars are really interesting, especially if it's a democratic Japan in a scenario where there's far right and far left ideologies duking it out somewhere else. But there's a problem in that you're kind of limiting the amount of proxy conflicts you can have. And it's like, yeah, you can have a proxy conflict with Japan and Russia. But the problem is with like the Japanese and the Russian geopolitical situation is that it's kind of always that Russia wants this and this and this. They just want to be able to get out into another ocean. That's always been their problem. I give Russia the Kiel Canal in this case, but I don't give them Constantinople, but they could be friends with Turkey, which means they get to go through here too. So like this is like Russia unchained. Shouldn't Manchuria be independent? Well, in Kaiserreich, the Manchurian warlord is a like full claimant to China, and when they take over China without Japan invading, then they get Manchuria. But if Fengtian betrays Japan and they occupy Manchuria, then they get a special option to release Manchuria specifically. So I'm just showing the usual, like, let's make a democratic, collaborative Chinese government and then see what happens, right? This is what usually people do. I think that this is what happens in Shadow of the Four Horsemen. But I'd like to suggest something a little more radical. We don't need it to be a tripolar Cold War. If we wanted to have China and Japan be at odds, you could either play Tino, or if they decide to completely remove and replace it with something else that you don't recognize and are upset about, then you can go play Twilight Struggle, which will have a similar conflict to this. But this is what I'm thinking. And this is pretty radical, but the king has a claim. But okay, so I guess you're kind of getting mixed up, because in Kaiserreich, the Qing Empire's in Beijing. It's not that Puyi is a collaborator with the Japanese like it was in our history. But anyway, is Greece a Russian ally? No, not currently. I thought that it would make sense for them to be neutral. You could also have like a proxy conflict there too, between like the government and socialists. I'm not entirely sure. We can look at this stuff too. This is just like a part 2 to see if we can add more to the world, right? Why does Afghanistan own Pakistan? Because I thought that it would be interesting if there was that sort of problem between Russia and socialist India. They could like split it down the middle or something. But we can totally just scrap this and keep a full India without any Pakistan. But I like that. So yeah, over here, this is a 2-China situation. What image do I use as my base? So this is the QBAM base map. Now, there's a bunch of different versions of this. I don't know where I got this. I think it's in the Google Doc that I have. I should have it linked in this stream, and if I don't, then it's in another one of my videos, and you can find it there. But there's all these little selections here. There's different grays, and depending on what setting you set to your magic wand, you can either make it so this little thing or 120. No, it would be 180, I think. 180. In this case, it would be everything that goes up to this gray line, but if you go to 220 and you select everything, then it's the entire country of Chad. Or is that Chad? No, that's... I don't know. Hold on. Chad, Nigeria, Dahomey? No. I think they call themselves something different now. Yeah, I don't know which one this was. I'm sorry. I failed my African geography. But anyway, so that's how I get quick selections. How did Mongolia get Inner Mongolia? Okay, so let's talk lore, right? Instead of having Japan just somehow sign some neutrality with Russia and they agree to just let each other have spheres of influence in China, which is already interesting and gives Russia the ability to prop up buffer states like Mongolia and East Turkestan, it still gives Japan a really powerful position where they have a very large peasant class subjugated to them in China that's just going to give them a lot of free food so that there's more Japanese people to make industrial goods, which is their plan, not necessarily an aspect of reality. But then, of course, if you're going to develop a country to have them beholden to you, then you're in a situation where they eventually would rebel, and that's really compelling. But I think it would be more interesting if there was an attempt to just destroy Japan that ended up in a different way. So I'll read the chat in a bit, but I want to answer this question. So my idea for lore in this case would be that Russia is fighting Japan because Semyonov was doing stuff. There's an option for Russia to align with the KMT, which means that they can, the right KMT specifically. So if there's right KMT here and left KMT here, and then they have some sort of like agreement to unite against the Japanese as they're invading, then naturally Russia and China would work together to push Japan out of mainland Asia. Note that this still means that there's a Taiwan here, and there's this stuff here, and Russia would need to be occupying some territory. So in this case, Russia would use their puppet states to march in through here. So the Russian occupation is like this. In fact, I believe that they should have Port Arthur here. So I'm going to keep the notes up. I want to secretly hide it here. So here's another thing. So I set it to tolerance 1 with contiguous. That means that it's only selecting this green section. I select this layer, I delete it. And this looks weird. Why is there a border here? That's because I have a effect. I don't know if you can see this. I guess you can't see this pop-up. But there's this layer style pop-up that shows you how to make a stroke. And I set a 2 pixel stroke on the outside with a normal blend mode. Then if I remove this effect, you see the black border is gone. And there's no black borders here. This is a background layer that is underneath a bleed prevent, which makes it so if I paint over, then it doesn't affect the water, but there's still a black border on the edge that's separate from the thickness of the stroke. But now this lets us see like this is unoccupied territory and there's still a border between all that. You don't have to manually make every border. Anyway, let's make this a Russian port. But now this is only going to be if this idea for Asia is different. So instead of making it a Russian layer, we're going to say Russian Port Arthur. We're going to eyedropper tool, select the color we have for Russia, and then select it here. Now, why is there a black pixel here? I believe that there's some elements in the QBAM and the way that they're selected that has like land things as like bodies of water or rivers. So I actually have been trying to keep these little artifacts instead of removing them, and it makes for interesting borders anyway. So now look at this. Now we have a situation where if we enable this idea, this folder for China, then we have the Russian Port Arthur, but we don't in the case of it being Japanese. So I hope that helps. Anyway, so let's see. Oh yeah, so if Russia used a Mongolian buffer state in order to help out with this anti-Japanese fight, then they would give land to Mongolia. I think that there's also claims that Mongolia has on Manchuria, so we'd respect that. And I think there's also claims that Russia has on Manchuria, or they could have a claim because there's enough people in Harbin or whatever. Which is like, why would they do that? But you gotta remember, this isn't the Soviet Union. This is a far right. This is a far right Russia. So, in the event that the right and left Kuomintang United Front breaks apart, then the right Kuomintang win doesn't necessarily mean they're going to get this or this. Maybe not even Manchuria. Like, they're just going to be subjugated by Russia. It's not some benevolent, like, self-determination, whatever, that the Soviet Union actually effectively kind of did in our history. Like, all their faults, they still had some principles, right? Done anything artistic? I am actually thinking about making a atlas-style map for project stresses ending for Germany. I think that'd be really fun. I actually have in the past made some high quality maps. I'm just trying to see if I can find them right now. Family coding, no. I don't know if I can find it right now. Maybe it's in my old folder here. Yeah, I can't find it right now. Once I do, I'll maybe share it on Discord. But I'm thinking about making an alternate history atlas of Germany in the Project Stresa timeline, where it's not only that it's the Weimar Republic with Austria sans Vorarlberg and only a sliver of Alsace-Lorraine, but I might even retcon that. But it would also be an alternate internal borders situation. So, and then I'm even thinking about making that into something that you could buy, like a map, kind of like how Kaiserreich Studios does it with Kaiserreich. I just thought that'd be fun to do. Hold on. Terra Mapper? What's going on? Why did Pakistan get Afghanistan? Okay. Is Afghanistan getting Pakistan? I answered it earlier. I thought that it would be interesting if during the socialist revolution in India, Afghanistan went in on the dominion of India. And it could even happen right now where if the dominion of India loses the war with Afghanistan, then Afghanistan gets everything. But maybe that's not even a thing anymore. I don't even really know. But you could have that, right? So then we have an interesting dynamic where India claims all this land. Russia wants to get rid of the last remnants of the Basmachi that would be out operating here. Iran is like, hey, maybe I want this. Maybe we can be friends. It's a reason to have conflict. Oh, now you don't have the two anymore, Mrs. Zalazak. Yeah, but there's like this thing in YouTube now where the like ranking of fans is shown depending on their engagement with the stream. I don't know if that also is affected by donations or anything like that, but yeah, okay. Well, let's just go all around over the place. I'm interacting with you guys, and it's a good way to start talking. So, I've been thinking, and this is kind of radical, but I'm going to answer the Egypt thing, but I just wanted to talk more about this idea I had quickly. So, in my Krasnacht LoreGrave video, I talked about how if you play as Russia and you do the Eureka Conference and you're solidarists, then you can get into a situation where, despite the level of the Entente and the Third International's ability to fight each other, they go to white peace and everybody guarantees each other's independence. Which is bonkers because it could actually mean that national France still exists. Now, the Cairo Pact is an anti-imperialist alliance between a bunch of Middle Eastern nations. They would have, in this case, if they beat the Ottomans, which I think they should have more of a border like this with Assyria. This with, I think, I don't know, is it Najd or is it Jabal Shamar? Whatever it is, I'm putting it here. And then there's Oman and Yemen that may or may not be allies with the Cairo Pact. Then there's also the Saracenians, not Libya, because that was an Italian name that they were given. And then there's Tunis, which is actually part of San France. So give me a second. So look at this. So I alt-click to only select one layer. It's important that if you're using Photoshop for this, you don't select another layer because then you won't remember this. When you alt-click it again, it returns back to this. So look again. Click here, alt-click. But look, there's a problem with the border. If I just do it here... Oh, wait. Oh, is it because of the... No, what? That's weird. I think that, yeah, there's still a problem even though it doesn't look like it. Because look, I do it here, I unselect, there's still like a little border here. But if I, instead of that, remove the stroke first, then there's a little less pixels for us to have to redo. So then we go up here, fill in the border, the boundaries. Now we have a San France here. So then there's a problem here. The Cairo Pact isn't involved in this peace deal that the Russians and the Third International had. So San France still exists, but maybe they are forced to recognize that they're not coming back to France. So then it's just a Pied Noir Republic here, assuming that they don't have West Africa. But then the Cairo Pact is a anti-imperialist but not socialist power, which could actually function more effectively as our quote-unquote third party in the Cold War, but it's more like a very extended proxy that they have, the Third International has, against the rest of the capitalist world. And we can get into that more later because this is like less Russian and more Entente remnants. There could be a Algerian and a Tunisian revolt that is supported by Egypt in the Cairo Pact, and Morocco too could have a situation where they potentially invade or try to set up a Maghrebi state or something. There's just a lot of options for us to have if this is deliberately not a Algerian thing and the French are still around. So anyway, why does Egypt exist? So they're going to be the Cairo Pact's leading member, and they're going to come into contact with Turkey. Turkey may have a lot of ideological similarities to Savinkov's Russia. They might actually be allies. In the event that they are, they could reclaim a lot of territory here away from the Cairo Pact, but then there's a question of what does Iran have out of their situation with the Desert War? Did they manage to get overlordship over Iraq? If they did, what's going to happen if Iran is friends with Russia and then Turkey is ideologically isolated, doesn't have much room to be able to be friends with the socialists? Maybe there is an element that they're trying to take over here, like trying to make these guys socialist. But the point is that somebody needs to own these straits. Whoever owns these straits is able to push a lot more power projection through. If Turkey aligns with Russia, then they're able to do that. And then this Cairo Pact situation where they basically have no threats and are basically friends with all of these Third International people over here. Instead, now there's a Russia that can, if they want to, come over there, fuck them up, and then try to even take over Suez and stuff. Like, there's a lot of interesting dynamics here that are specifically only really available to a Russia that's right-wing. Ave Lorda, thank you very much. Why doesn't Egypt have Sinai Peninsula? Because when I quickly selected something to remember that Egypt exists, I didn't actually properly depict their border. But that's really easy to do. We just alt-click this thing. We have 220 selected, so we'll do this. Go into Egypt. And you don't have to paint back. You can just paint like this, and it prevents the problem of having to turn off the stroke. But I need to remember what Kaiserreich even looks like in some cases with Egypt. So I'm going to open the game. I played some I didn't play any games. I put some, this Talons in Twilight. Oops. Yes, Talons in Twilight is a mod that exists and it's pretty awesome, and you should go support their stuff because I really like it. We'll just focus on this now. Deal with that later. What I'm trying to figure out right now, okay, so there's a lot to figure out. I want there to be a situation where there's a China civil war that Russia can get involved in. One of the things that I'm trying to consider is what outcomes to this civil war there would be. I know that in the event that if the right Kuomintang are starting to lose, then they would want to take over Manchuria so that they keep their Port Arthur acquisition here. They keep their Port Arthur acquisition and prevent Vladivostok from being a threat so that they can continue to put pressure in the Pacific. The question is, what kind of pressure would they be able to push into the Pacific? Usually in Krasnacht townlands, especially ones that I'm aware of, like Shadow of the Four Horsemen, Japan is dominant in Asia. And the Entente, the Windsor monarchy, the last place to hang out is here, but there's Westralia, which is a socialist republic maybe? I'm not entirely certain. But now the question is, what are we going to be doing if over here there's an Entente faction here of really weird remnants, like the Dutch East Asian colony here still existing in Papua New Guinea? The German colonies, they wouldn't have Malaya and Singapore, but maybe they would actually. And if they did, what would happen there? Not sure what's going to happen in Africa yet, so that's one of the things I want to talk about. But what sort of conflicts can we have here, and whose side are they going to be on? Is the Philippines US backed? Well, if the USA is socialist, can they be backing the Philippines? I haven't played enough of the new update to know for sure. I wanted to get that opinion too. Western Australia based, yeah, I saw it happen one too many times in Krasnacht, and I'm pretty convinced that it's almost like a core aspect of the mod. There's something that I will say now is there was a suggestion that somebody had in the comments of the LoreGrave Krasnacht video that it would actually be more interesting if the USA was not socialist and was like MacArthurite or Federalist, and then they would be leading the Entente faction, and that could actually be pretty interesting. The more I think about it, though, it just makes more sense for it to be either a socialist America or even, in a very weird circumstance, a divided between socialists in the East and other reactionaries in the West. But even then, it's like, do we really want that? Also, yeah, I'm just going to flip this over to the one where they have Canada annexed, because that just makes a lot more sense to me. Because why would they respect imperialist boundaries? Like, oh, there'd be a transition government. Yeah, whatever. Like, transition to what? They're just establishing the state again. Doesn't make any sense to me. Opinion on The Fire Rises. I haven't played it. I think that it seems like people really enjoy it and has good game design. I'm not entirely certain, though. I think it's bold that they made an alternate history that takes modern day elements, and the cultural impact that it had is significant, so I'll have to take a look at it soon. Okay, yeah, you listen to your mother. Goodbye, Terra Mapper. You're not happy about what? Canada being annexed? I wouldn't be either, but I think that's just what happens in these sort of things. How could Russia put pressure in the Pacific? Depends a lot on Japan and their allegiance. That's a good idea to talk about now. There's a split Korea here, but I don't think that's even going to happen. I think it's just going to be a far-right Korea here. But when it comes to potential civil war, I think Japan actually might have one. So if I understand Japanese history correctly, there was a large leftist movement in Japan after they lost World War II. It's either because it was some way to be anti-American without being specifically imperialistic, or it was like playing to that sort of nationalism, that especially Maoistic usage of nationalism to advance communism, or whatever you want to call it. I don't know the theory exactly, but there would be a lot of leftist movement there, right? In our history, the USA did some interesting things that I'm not going to say without sources, and I don't have them right now, but I just heard this. Interesting methods of suppressing the leftist movement in Japan. But in this case, Japan lost everything outside of the home islands and Formosa. They are isolated in that they can only trade with their prime rival of Russia or China, and there's no occupying force. If there's no occupying American force, there could actually be a significant leftist movement in Japan that rises up against the imperial family. But there's even the possibility that, given currently, right now, pretty sure this is the case after a little bit of research, the Japanese Communist Party actually acknowledges that they aren't going to like eliminate the monarchy, and it's just like I remember their wording, but they're like, if I understand it properly, they're like, it's such an ingrained thing in Japanese culture that we can't just remove the Japanese monarchy, is like basically their acknowledgement. And they're like, maybe in the future we can transition away from it and not be violent about it. But maybe they're only saying that because they are under threat of being labeled terrorists. If they say anything else, I don't know. But it's an interesting aspect. Regardless, there could be a civil war here in Japan. So then the imperial family might need to actually get Russia's help to actually exist still. And if they do, and they manage to get all the leftist Japanese out, then where do they go? Maybe they go to Formosa. But then what about all the Chinese people living there? There could be some weird like condominium of the leftist Japanese and the leftist Chinese in the event that the right Kuomintang lose their civil war or win the civil war. And they're both hanging out in Taiwan together. Japanese socialist movement turned against the whole worldwide communism. Syndicalist world. Yeah, I think that even if they don't join the Third International, they would still have some elements of like the French would not want them to be a Russian ally, which could happen if it's the imperialist Japanese. I don't know if you've seen the Krasnacht LoreGrave video, but I suggested that Italy even become Fourth International and more nationalistic. If the Mussolinites win their civil war here and stay divided away from the Third International, the Fourth International might be able to ally Japan. There's a really weird niche path. It's possible. Formosa would be like Suriname in TNO. I actually don't know what Suriname is in TNO currently. Sorry, I just had to talk to my wife quickly. A renewed Chinese united front against Russia, similar to Man in the High Castle. I don't know about Man in the High Castle, but yeah, it would be it would be a united front until it doesn't work anymore. I'm just trying to read up on all this stuff because I was talking a lot. Alt history less grounded. I don't know about Flame for Winter, but I've already talked about less grounded stuff in like TNO, and I think that TNO had a really good thing going where they were allowing themselves to be more flexible, but I'm not entirely certain if that really works out anymore. So I'm just going to quickly show Hearts of Iron 4. It's going to show there. Okay. So I did like it's kind of like an observer thing and cheated to make sure that Iran wins. So if it's 1939 and this is early, then that's just because of cheats. And I don't want sandstorms obstructing my mappies. So I'm just looking at this quickly to understand what Kaiserreich borders are like so that we can potentially reflect them in the map here. So yeah, so Yemen has this. I don't think they... Yeah, this is Hijazi too, so what's the factions like? Hijaz joined the Cairo Pact. Okay, so Cairo Pact is like this. Tabriz Accords are like that. Why is there a sandstorm? Please let there stop being a sandstorm. Egypt demands the liberation of Iraq. What if we do this? So Iraq is now completely free. Interesting. Socialist agitation? What is going... Wow. It's amazing how much the stuff has... how much Kaiserreich has little focus trees for nations that might not even appear for extra depth of gameplay. It's so awesome. Anyway, Syria has this stuff. We probably aren't going to be able to reflect this properly, but what's interesting is that even in this case, Ottomans have claims on Homs, Aleppo, Diyarbakir, Adana, Van, and that's it. And then Iran has claims on this Kurdistanish province. So, and then this also, Kurdistan also has a car in this. So yeah, it's pretty interesting. Armenia also exists, and I know in Iran you can actually take over all the Caucasus, but we're not going to worry about that. So let's just get back to Photoshop here. Should probably not put a question mark next to my my scenes, because it's like, wait, is there a different Photoshop one? By Void. But Afghanistan still doesn't have a focus tree. Well, it could be cool if once they did. Why does Iran not have Iraqi Kurdistan? Because I did not know how to properly map that with references that I have currently. I would actually do that, but these are just placeholders. I literally took them from another folder. I think the Stressa folder, or our timeline 1939 or 1936. Dutch monarchy. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Formosa. Yeah. So yeah, I think that it could be that Japan exists there in exile, or it could be something else. I'm not entirely sure, but there's a lot of opportunity for Taiwan to be the exile of a bunch of different countries, just for big memes, I guess. What else is there? Bulgaria became communist in 1944 and abolished the monarchy in 1946. So for about a year or two, they're a monarcho-communist state. That's interesting. Could be interesting if that even happens here. I don't know if it's really gonna happen like that though. Hold on, just need a minute. I want to read, chat, and drink coffee. Yeah, I don't think Korea would stay divided. Do MacArthur America, have the left Kuomintang China, or Bharatiya India. Yeah, you're right that would need to be the case in order for it to be properly balanced. So in that case, I might even reject it just because it's too far off of the core of what a Krasnacht timeline should be. But it's an interesting idea to have regardless, so I'll bring it up and be like, yeah, this is cool, but this wouldn't be Krasnacht. An interesting part about TFR is that it's a railroaded story. Yeah, I noticed that there's different outcomes for like the quote-unquote European war. And I actually really value stuff like that. It's not sandboxy, but that actually has its own merit and benefit, and you're allowed to focus more on story, so I agree with that. Egypt could support Somalia to stop the Ethiopian threat. Yes, and that's an interesting thing too, because Somalia was supposed to be modernized and potentially even national populist. That's not true, Lord Dad. Bulgaria was led in a coalition in 1944, only became communistic in 1946. So it was like a socialist united front, and that makes a little more sense. Even if the leaders were the communists, there's debates to be had for sure. In my Kaiserreich game, not this one, but I did see a national populist Somalia in one of my time lapses, so that's possible. Over the course of the war, Russia begins liberalizing. That's actually possible given the fact that the solidarists are in charge. I guess I'll bring it back to Hearts of Iron 4 here. So I haven't really read the events here, but the codification of the regime, the authoritarian Democrats will join the coalition, and you need to not have solidarist aligned people over here, or else you're gonna have a problem because they're trying to cleanse the party, right? Meanwhile, this is codification of the regime. So they're actually, instead of it just being like there's an emergency, the Russia needs to be united, just give us everything, get dictatorship, yay, yay, yay. It's like, okay, no, actually there needs to be some sort of participation of government and some religious integration, but not everything, right? Changing popularity of national populism. See, so there's already some stint towards this, but it's not that they would just go away. So there's some element here that would do that. But the most plausible way for Russia to continue to exist in this timeline is that they slightly liberalize. Sorry for hitting the microphone there. So if they slightly liberalize, because once they slightly liberalize, then they'll be able to get more liberal people in their ally, in their faction, and it would be more a anti-communistic one. So there's a lot of benefit here. Scandinavia Federation remain neutral. That's actually what happens in Krasnacht, but they are they're just trading partners. So there's just a Scandinavian big trading block up here. Fun. Too far is really fun. Waiting for more updates. Yeah, I hope that. So there's this thing, and I don't know if this is gonna happen for TFR, and I don't want to be like. Yeah, I'm just not gonna mention it. I know that they had that problem with their lead developer, and then they didn't anymore, and I wish them the best as well. Russia potentially liberalizing over time is interesting. I'd argue it'd be similar to China. The economy in public somewhat liberalizes, but the politics remain pretty authoritarian. That makes a lot of sense, yeah. Or pro-French because Canada's fallen. I'm not sure what that's in reference to, actually. The Algerian revolt could turn into a proxy war to support coming not just from Arab countries, but also the Third International. Yes, definitely. Because the Third International would actually be collaborating with the Cairo Pact mostly. But they would also want to make the Cairo Pact socialist. But they also couldn't make them syndicalist because they don't have an industrial base. So they'd probably be investing in the Cairo Pact to modernize them to be able to have a communist revolution there in the first place. Which could mean that it's like pan-Arabic socialism like Nasser or something. Like, who knows? Hi, Tarim, how are you? United Arab Federation that collapses into a civil war. Maybe. I'm not sure. I think I would be going for the way that it's currently mapped in Kaiserreich, which makes it difficult to map, and my cat keeps trying to get attention and pets. I guess, yeah, so we can use these provinces to properly show the borders. I think that this is a little too much for Assyria, but it's still most accurate. So we'll just, so in this case, we have a selection that overrides here. So if we fill it in here, then it's not going to work up here. I'm going to randomly get a color here, and then Alt click it so it's only this blank layer, and then press it in here. There's still problems in that the borders are divided, and we can fix that. And there's also this problem over here where there's a land that's occupied by Turkey that's not, the cat is really getting in the way here. All right. Select everything here, but we need to, hold on. We need to make a layer of Turkey that is smaller. So I just go Turkey small. Then I select this and then hide this and click delete. So now it's smaller. But now we also need to have the borders, which means that we have to go, I wish I knew a better way to do this. It's easier if there's already a pre-established border like here, because then I can select it like this and then not have to worry about being out of the lines. But in this case here, that's not a direct border, so then we'd have to do something like this, right? And then this is a weird non-existent administrative border now, so we need to get rid of that. Yeah, and then if you do this shift thing properly, then there could be some artifacts there. So we're just going to go through this quickly. Description of the current ethno-linguistic. I have no idea what that means. Like, if Turkey doesn't have a province or two in Armenia and potentially not all of Kurdistan, then I would imagine that it would be a lot more Turkish-centric. It's hard to say what the impact of having the Ottoman Empire and also, therefore, the Caliphate of the Sunni would impact the linguistic development of Turkey, because I know that Kemal had enforced the Turkish language to be written in the Latin alphabet, which may have affected the development of the Turkish language, but I'm not an expert on Turkish language or history. All I know is that they are a big pain to manage in EU4 because of how big they are. I've been thinking about playing an Ottoman game in EU4 now that EU5's release date is known. I don't know if people know, but I have 5,000 hours plus in EU4, so I'm particularly good at it, I would say. But not as good as somebody like Flurry Worry. I don't think anybody is as good as Flurry Worry. Hi again, Void, welcome back. This could make it so you're alluded to the black sheep of syndicalists backing Algerian revolutionaries more comfortably, while the French are frustrated with them. Yeah, exactly. Wait, this is like a second one. Cairo Pact. Yes, exactly. So then there's a matter of like, are the Algerians going to be socialist or are they going to be Egyptian? They're probably going to not Egyptian. They're probably going to be Cairo Pact because there'd probably be some sort of like, I don't really want to be friends with my oppressor tongue, even if you are the people who helped me. But there's some element here. Favorite Hearts of Iron 4 mod? It used to be TNO, and I've already explained why it's not my favorite anymore. I usually play vanilla nowadays, actually, just because there's some element to like the streamlinedness of vanilla. Kaiserreich, I think, is the best quality, and the content that they've removed, they replace it immediately with something that still respects the original vision. So I really value that about Kaiserreich. So I'd probably say Kaiserreich is my favorite. I've heard about Godspeed. I haven't seen it that much. I know it's pretty crazy, I think. And a lot of lore to look into, which could be interesting, but I don't know much else about it. I sort of mean there's a Greco-Turkish population exchange. That wouldn't have because that was a Turkic-Greek agreement after the Greco-Turkish War I actually don't know how that really resolved in Kaiserreich's timeline, because that still would have happened because they were on opposite sides of the Great War, right? I think that there's still a lot of intermingling between them, and I know that in Kaiserreich, and it could be interesting to have in this thing here, they could be actively seeking to reclaim, like, didn't they have like these borders after a certain partition? But yeah, we don't have to get into that. But yeah, there'd be a lot more Greco-Turkish intermingling here, because I'm pretty sure even in, I'm just quickly checking Hearts of Iron 4. Yeah, the capital is still called Constantinople. It's not called Istanbul, because they still are like, I don't know. The Ottoman Empire history is really interesting. I'm just gonna put a note here to be like, this is not Turkish. Armenia, it would be something like this. It's actually really interesting. Why do I have them being Russian right now? They wouldn't have gone to war over it. They might have gone to war over Azerbaijan and Georgia. So yeah, now we're getting into the interesting stuff. Now things are getting interesting. Yeah, let's focus on Turkey for sure. Upcoming vanilla China rework. I've only seen that they added a bunch more warlords, and I think that it's more realistic. Yes, it's actually realistic. In a game that's based off of reality and history, it is a good thing to have realism. So I'm glad that they're going to be more realistic. I've just policed myself so much in the way that I talk about Hearts of Iron 4 stuff, and just like omit the word realistic, because as soon as you start saying realistic, you have a problem, in my opinion. Where is the Caucasus? Is it Eastern Europe? Yeah, here. Caucasus. Armenia. There you go. A lot of redacted messages I don't get a chance to see. Watching a video called to your friend said that it was the Tino ending in Kaiserreich. Would I do something? What do I think is Kaiserreich's Tino? I think that it's more like the what Twilight Struggle has currently set up. Not only is their start date the same, but Canada's super oppressed arenos by the communist arenos, and that really resonates with me. You know, my political bias is what dictates what I think is the Tino version, is what I'm trying to point out. Yeah, I think it would be that Germany controls as much stuff over here. Russia is a terrible mess, and I'll talk about it in the video. And then Japan is really big, and that's interesting, but there's also their own problems, right? Libya, the scenario: social democrat, Republican, Tripolitania, and Idris, absolute monarchy, and Serencia. Oh yeah, because they aren't necessarily united. Yeah, I'll try to keep that as an element in this. I'm not entirely sure if that's the case, but we'll see. Hi, Dark Sands, Recess. Stay learning and all that stuff, or whatever you want to say. Whatever it is nowadays. Lore Boy is going to be going to school soon, and that's really interesting to me. I'm excited for him. I don't like realism as plausibility. Yes, we all need to ignore some realism to make good alternate history. Yes, exactly. Because if your alternate history was realistic, you wouldn't have an alternate history. It literally would not have happened because it's not realistic. That's not what really happened. Well, the start date in Krasnacht has always been the 50s, and if I tried to make it the 60s, I would need to make a bunch of lore, which would require me to make this map anyway, but it would need to make me determine certain outcomes. And I think there's more potential for this world to go hot nearly immediately after the defeat of the Germans, and it's just a matter of getting extra depth and finagling the situation to benefit it the most. Alright, So Van. So this area would be... Hold on, I'm using modern day Turkey borders and I should be using Kaiserreich borders. There we go. In fact, I'm going to quickly do this. Yeah, that looks a lot more reasonable for Armenia. So... is this the end of... Yeah, it is. I'm smart enough to remember the ending of this playlist. Let's go back to the beginning here. All right. So Armenia is here, and then alt-clicking the reference. The Van province, looking at Hearts of Iron 4, is those two provinces. So we'll take this away. We'll... I guess I could go to Iran, but maybe it would be Kurdistan. This is a thing that's really interesting, and I'm sure we'll flesh this out a little more later. But there's a lot of potential to have with the Iranians and the Cairo Pact having a war, which then just becomes a big conflict that the Moscow Accord and the Third International fight between I think this is correct. There's a lot of unknowns right now, so I'll keep this deliberately separate. Hold on. It could end up being something like this. And then there's a fight between these people, and then Turkey comes in, which could be fun. Canada isn't that a Protestant twilight struggle? Yeah, I can tell because they have an independent state. But what is this for a timeline? Okay, so this is Krasnacht. I don't know if you heard of this mod. It was an old, like, 2018 era mod. It was a successor to Kaiserreich, but it petered out. There are other attempts to revive it. This is my own take on the situation using their core aspects. I made one video on it, and I expanded on the decently the primary conflict. But now we're looking at secondary conflicts because that video reached its like goal. South America, yeah, just make South America literally the same, right? That's what you're supposed to do, right? I'm kidding. I have no idea what I'm doing for South America. I'm going to probably leave it blank, actually. I think that this stuff right here is a lot more interesting, mostly because we're looking at nations that are bordering Russia and how the Third International can impact their ability to get prepared for a potential world war. And South America could be fun, but South America is not going to be a main player. Something I think that is worth noting is that you could have an integralist Brazil. I think I said this in the stream last time, but I didn't make it into the video. An integralist Brazil that then goes, wait, we're basically the same thing as Savinkov, but we have a monarchy, and he's anti-monarchy. What do we do? And then there's like an internal conflict about that. Armenia should start with Kars, Yerevan, and Karabakh. I believe that you're correct. I just don't know where those are on the map. And if you try to tell me through text, it's going to be a disaster. So I'll just try my best to figure out where those are and map it properly. You may Krasnacht once, Syndicalism, with the point reading theory, and then you just got frustrated. Yeah, that's basically exactly what happened with Krasnacht. But then imagine that there's a bunch of different people with a bunch of different ideas and ideologies that clash, making every debate a political one instead of one that focuses on trying to make the story or the history accurate and proper. So yeah, that's what I think happened wrong with Krasnacht, and how in something that we can fix. Just expanding the Syria borders here. I think that this would be correct. But then obviously it's not entirely accurate to the reality. Oh my god, conflict in my Kaiserreich Cold War? It's more plausible than you think. And this will be Iran, and Iran will be it'll be a Persian puppet, I think. Fertile Crescent. Iraqi Kurdistan? Hey, but where's Iraq? Huh? Palestine, Phoenicia, Jordan, Syria, Druze, Iraq. There you go. But that's too red, so we'll just brown. So then Iran has a problem with the Syrians. Iraq has a problem with the Syrians. The Syrians could even be SSNP or something. They try to go in here. Maybe they're not, though. Kurdistan desperately trying to become independent could be a point of contention between everybody. I can see the socialists actually supporting Kurdistan just to mix things up a bit. And then there's the rest of Iran. I mean, the rest of Arabia here. It's interesting that there's a Hejaz and then there's also a Arabia. We should probably keep that. And we'll use the Ottoman borders as reference there. And this is just Hejaz. So I'll just make a custom color here for Hejaz. There we go. And then we can make a big Yemen, Ottoman stuff. I'm going to read chat. I don't know what happened in Portugal, but a proxy conflict to see who gets Cape Verde between Integralist Brazil and Iberia. That's interesting. Yeah, because then, yeah, that's a really good idea because the Brazilians even have focus trees in Kaiserreich to help them get colonies or something. And if they become the torchbearers of the Portuguese somehow, did they remove it or no? This is just hidden because they're not integralist in my Hearts of Iron game here. Anyway, yeah, that's a really good idea. I want to note that down actually. Integralist Brazil getting involved in the Portugal situation. Could be interesting. What else do we got here? Why do Eastern European states not have modern borders? Because they probably shouldn't, but they do. That's a good point. I think that we might adjust that. Only thing I can think of really adjusting is the Belarus border here. And we can quickly do that like this. Then we have a little problem there. Huh? Uh-oh. Yeah, I made this site on the wrong layer, I think. Let me just make a Savinkov v3. And then try to take it over here. Okay. That was taking a little while. I can adjust these borders more later. It's just a little reference for me to remember that the Belarusian would probably be a little smaller. They should be pushed slightly west. So Romania has more Hungary. Well, this is an idea that I wanted to bring up in the video too, but it's really specific in the way that it needs to be mapped out, so I'm not sure how I'd do it yet. Romania should be like the Hungary of our timeline, where Hungary had an anti-communist revolt and then they got suppressed. And in this case, it would be Romania having some like monarchist last stand or something, or an internal conflict with the Iron Guard, and then they get reorganized. Romania and Hungary. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm thinking. That they would probably do something that Germany did in real life with the division between Transylvania. So all really good ideas. Thanks everyone. I'm looking forward to seeing if I can incorporate this into the video. Oops. Yeah, so any other ideas? This is all good stuff. 1945. Yeah, King Michael's coup. Could be that King Michael tries to liberate Romania. Be an interesting realpolitik for the Third International to consider supporting a monarchist. Having a powerful Iran seems like it would be really fun. I know that Iran can get a bunch of claims. I need to learn more about Iranian history. But it could be that the Islamic Republic of Iran might be ideological similar to Savinkov's Russia. I see. Interesting. I know that. They're quite brave for attempting to overthrow the communist regime like that, given how powerful the Soviets were. It's surprising. So the problem with some of these references is that if you looked here, the way that they have the Middle East is a little different. But it's okay. We can just work with that. Where's the Arabia at? Anatolia, Fertile Crescent, Arabia. Oh, there's a Hejaz. I'll try to get Hejaz in there. There's the Yemen. So the what I'm doing there is there's a color scheme that's sorted and shows me everything that they believe would be a good representation of the countries of a certain geopolitical region. So I've been using that, and it is coherent and often leads to colors not clashing with each other in regions. So oh, you did? Oh, yeah. The Kulturkrieg video was edited by someone else. If you want me to make sure that you get credit, I could link your Reddit post in the description or something. I'm glad that you seem to be okay with it, but yeah, I always want to make sure that people are credited properly for their work. Middle Africa was devoured by Goring. It's gone now. Yeah, Middle Africa is really interesting. They're definitely going to have a situation where they're not going to be able to retain the colony. I could be like, oh well, Middle Africa's already dead, and then there's a bunch of different nations. But then that would be kind of like, oh well, then why are you talking about with Kulturkrieg? But then again, if the outcome is always going to be that the Middle African colony collapsed and there's no player ability to prevent it, then why isn't it already broken at the start of the game? And it's like, oh well, because it wouldn't have happened until that point. Okay, well then make the start date of Kulturkrieg later, but then you can't do that because then all the work that's already been made is gone. So that's why Kulturkrieg are kind of in a pickle. But we're in a situation where we can outline it however we want. We don't even need to worry about if it's possible to code or not. Bessarabia, Romania owns it. It depends on Russian goodwill. Maybe the revolt is repressed by Romania. Russia could take Moldova as punishment. Maybe, but then there's even the problem of the Ukrainian majority regions of Moldavia. If you just integrate them into the Ukrainian aspect of Russia, then you're giving them a better opportunity to get national identity and organize. So in a way, it's actually beneficial for Russia to have Romania own that part, so that they don't have to worry about it. So it's just something to consider for sure. Lore ideals. I'm not sure what you mean by lore ideals. Even if they collapse, they can retain in some places like Tanzania or Namibia. Yeah, so I had a big note in the past called the Old World Alliance. Somebody else named it. My idea was the Alliance of Asses. But you can have Portugal and Namibia and Royalist South Africa and just a southern cone, and then also Tanzania. So I don't think they'd be able to control Congo. I think that would go. I think that West Africa could still exist under French rule, and then there's just a bunch of different Islamic revolts that show up against the French. That could be fun. But it could also be better just to have it focused on the Algiers regime. Lore ideas. Yeah, like maybe even like little shorts, that could be fun. Yeah, I liked making shorts for the Culture Creek video. I think it helped it perform better too. I guess we can start mapping this out though, because we have time and we have reference. Only thing is I need a South Africa color, but I can probably just use our timeline. Yeah, that South African border is a little incorrect, and then we should also take a color from goodbye our timeline 1939. Hello Mittel Africa. Oh, I guess I could have done this. But now I can do this too. And just select these things. I know that this is Germany's Africa. They wouldn't probably have this stuff. We should make a new folder for this stuff. Southern Cone. Oh, is it even called the Southern Cone? Yeah, I think it is. I think the Madagascar would have already revolted. Or we could have them revolt as a part of the game, and then the strategic outpost there is kept vital. I'll read some more in chat in a bit. I just need to make sure I do some mapping. I like the way that they did this with these borders here. Having it be a slightly different color. That's how I do it too. It could be that instead of South African exiles, it's Boers. I don't know if that's even a path or not, but it could be interesting. Namibia. There you go. There you go. I said it like the way I did before. I was just super confused looking at Namibia. I hope that helped with whatever you're doing. It's interesting getting nostalgic for old content like that. I didn't think I'd have that for my own work, but I guess it makes sense that I would. And then let's get Rhodesia in here, but let's give it to South Africa. It's just a really rough thing. We'll just delete whatever ends up being over on the other side here. Okay, so look, so now we have this section here, but if we put on contiguous, select this and delete it, it's gone. Isn't that awesome? So this is the Southern Cone. Maybe we have Katanga because the borders look nice, right? And then up here it could be a revolt. We want big Somalia because that's basically like a core aspect of Krasnacht for sure. I'll try to get that though. Algerian Civil War, interesting. Yes, I agree. Well, no, it would be like what I think could. Oh, okay. Let's say the French are fighting Algerian separatists, and then after Algeria is free, then it becomes a matter of Third International versus Cairo Pact. Or if there's two different Algerian tags, and then the French probably can try to deal with it. And then in the event that the North French actually, the Sand France actually managed to exist, then the Russians could actually integrate them into the SAR pack, but they rebrand themselves to not be French, or they just are, and then that's Russia's ability to get into France again. By Void. Exactly, the massive French population in Algeria. This is that. This is that. Especially with all the exiles here, and maybe even more coming here, and then all of the exiles here coming up here. Like, this is just like some big apartheid state in northern Africa. Portugal lost the first war as a republic, lost the second as a monarchy. The situation's even worse. They must be in complete chaos, yes, and I think this is even what's going to be happening in Talons and Twilight's mod, is that they are going to have a problem over there. I think I was just talking to them about it yesterday. So I don't know if they'll be doing it exactly for sure or not, but... is this Katanga? That's, huh? There's 3 provinces for Katanga? No, is this Katanga? Yeah, I think that's Katanga. Maybe this is Katanga. Let's say this is Katanga. I don't know if it's actually accurate, but I can always adjust it. Something that I thought could be interesting is Timor being completely controlled by Portugal. I'm not entirely sure that's even existing. This is too red. This invokes communism. Let's tone it down. And let's shift it over. You can do this if you select the layers properly. But then there's a big black hole here. That's because the black border is intermingling with the thingy here. We'll just do it like this, even if it's a little sloppy. Algeria invaded by the Third International in the Second World War. Probably in Krasnacht lore, but in my version, where the Solidarists are in charge, they can do a white peace, and that means that these people could still exist. With just Tunisia, that's insane. I wouldn't. Algeria resembled totalist Italians. Yeah, perfect. There, that's perfect. Yes, exactly. We should really lean into the. We should really lean into the fact that we have a Franco-Italian split, even if that split causes a civil war, basically nearly immediately. They could already potentially be Italian aligned, and then there's another issue. Maybe then that's when the French nationalists show up. That's a really good idea. I really like that. I'm going to make note of that because that might be a little too complicated to map, but instead of national France being ruling and they face a revolt, Algeria could be Italian totalist, which then collapses / faces insurgencies after Italy collapses into civil war. I like that a lot. That's a really good idea. Yeah, I agree that Portugal would be in a really, really weak position. They're probably going to be the first one that faces anti-imperialist revolts. And unlike what may be in most cases, actually, when I can talk about that a little bit, and the compelling thing about this timeline, it was based off of this comment that I saw recently. Okay, there's actually something wrong with this this thing here. It should be like this, I think. Anyway, there was this comment that somebody said in the Krasnacht video where they asserted that a lot of Africans would probably just see syndicalism as labor imperialism. And that's like, what is that? It's kind of like a word salad of leftist ideological babble. But what they're trying to say is because Marx believed that a socialist revolution could only happen after industrialization, which naturally occurs from capitalism, which will naturally collapse, then that's the only time a socialist revolution could happen, right? In our history, that was kind of proven wrong with the fact that Lenin made the first communist country in an agrarian society. But in this timeline, that wouldn't have been the case. The socialist revolution happened in industrialized countries and succeeded. Marx was correct. What that means is that events like having colonies that were just made for cash crops with no industrial labor would not necessarily be socialist or would need to industrialize before achieving socialism. That isn't to say that the French syndicalists wouldn't be supporting Africans' industrialization projects, but it does mean that they wouldn't be eligible yet. That's why I'm having it where Egypt is like is an extension of the Third International's geopolitical interest against Russia in the Middle East, even if they aren't socialist. It's the same thing here. I'm pretty sure the Mozambique and Angolans were just communists, and we can have that happen here, even if they're totalists and maybe be more Italian aligned. The French would support them, and they'd potentially moderate and industrialize or whatever, and these people would be communists. But the Kenyan revolts, there's a Mau Mau revolt even in Kaiserreich that happens basically all the time. There's a Mau Mau revolt in their national populist. They actually might be Russian aligned. And that's pretty crazy to think about and consider, given everything that we know about anti-colonialism in our history and Russian imperialism. But that actually could happen. So if there's a far-right Kenya, then that would be a part of the Star Pact. So Africa would be a lot more nuanced than people might initially believe. Where do we have? Would it be East Africa? Nubia, Sudan, Ethiopia, Axum, Djibouti, Somalia, Kenya. There we go. Sorry for that. Not pop Kenya, and then there's also the iconic Somalia that we will be sure to map. And these don't belong in the southern cone, but I'm going to keep them there for now. Doesn't Somalia claim Egypt? I mean, a part of Kenya? That could be pretty interesting. No. I think that they claim... I'll keep this border undefined for now, because I think even Somalia needs more land here if it's going to be accurate to Krasnacht. Alright, let's take a look at this. Is industrially trade unionist. Africa is dominated by peasantry. So imposing socialism is interesting. It might even be basically impossible at the ground level. It would need to be like a syndicalist nation takes over a region and industrializes it and then gives it over. But isn't that just colonism? Isn't that just colonization? And that's the ideological problem that even the communists had, the Soviets had, when they were supporting the Kuomintang. So yeah, these guys are anti-imperialist, but they're not socialist. And then we all know the rest. If you want to play around with the French Algeria and the Solidarity's peace, you need a royalist Canada for it to work. What makes you say that? Because I'm pretty sure that it's even mechanically possible in Kaiserreich, where if you have Canada intervening in the Second American Civil War, but then they lose and get occupied by the Americans, then leadership of the Entente goes back to France, and then France can do that piece without Canada. Something that becomes a divide. Interesting. Yeah, exactly. It's interesting to look into, even if it's mostly fictional. Hi, just joined your live. Save it. I'm glad you joined. Yeah, watch it later. Maybe it'll become a VOD. I like that about YouTube. The watch later and stuff. I have YouTube Premium, so I can just download my own video and then listen to it again. It's good notes so that I can remember what to write for the script and things like that. I feel sorry for Twilight Struggle because I was working on their script and then the Krasnacht thing hit 2K likes and I don't want to break a promise. So, but there's a lot to talk about Krasnacht wise. And even if I do only really quickly highlight everything, it could be an interesting video and complete it out, round it out. Do you think Italy would just become fascist? Would they become something like Naspel? Well, that's the thing. Like, I really don't want to be saying anything incorrect here because of how controversial the topic is. But I believe, and this might be wrong, so take it with a grain of salt, I'm not a historian. Fascism in its initial form, at least propagandic-wise, was a lot more less pro-bourgeoisie than it ended up being. And what that means is the original form of fascism as it was advertised could be just straight up depicted there. But even in Kaiserreich, if you look at socialist Italy and you go down the totalist fascist revolution, reform the party, the black flag, you get black shirts and complete the you can just become just fascist and it's still a totalist sub-ideology. That's just the way that it would work in Krasnacht's timeline, and I mean Kaiserreich's timeline is how it is depicted currently. Kind of what happens in 1984, yeah. Own derivative form of socialism. Yeah, like the thing is that Mussolini's successor wouldn't necessarily be Mussolini 2. It would be like, I don't know. I hear a lot about Bordiga, or like there's like some Italian communist who advocated authority a lot. It could be a mix of him and Mussolini creating a different form of socialism. That actually might be more like Leninism. Maybe, I don't know. I'm not a leftist. I haven't studied the ideology enough to properly understand it, but I do see where you're going with this, and I think that you're on the right track. Why is ATR your channel banner when you're no longer helping them? That's a really good idea. I want to change that. But yeah, if people don't know, I just stepped away from AOTR. I just haven't. I don't know if there's any real reason. Like, I'm just too busy with other things, and they are taking their own direction. So just best of luck to them. But yeah, I'll change that. All right, cool. Lenin did prove the proletarian. Yes, they did prove that it's possible in a peasant society. What I'm saying is that the original theory was that it was impossible, and in Kaiserreich, Lenin failed, and the socialist revolution actually ended up happening in France like Marx had initially predicted, even if it wasn't the 1848 revolution. It would be extremely important due to the fact that feudalism had to be destroyed before full-on proletarian. Yes, exactly. So, but then I talk about this in the Krasnacht video, and you should definitely check it out because I already have it there. I also talk about it in German October, but I do understand that. It's just that in Kaiserreich, the ideological development of leftism happened differently, and it's worth studying that instead of just copying our history. What do I think of the Red Flood mod? It was pretty bold to make a nobody wins World War I, and the wackiness of it and them embracing it is something that is worth admiring. But I also don't necessarily really like those kind of ideologies, even if they're practiced for just jokes on the internet, because some people can take that and then go like, oh yeah, well no, actually I'm just a futurist, and it's just like, I don't know. Like it's not my cup of tea, but I can understand why other people like it. I'm not going to shame them for it. The Gaullist focus tree where you destroy all factories that you own is pretty interesting and like a really good gameplay challenge, and I like that a lot. Wasn't Bardiga in left comms called Lenin, more Lenin than Lenin, anti-trade union? Yeah, that's right. And that's the problem, is that I could be wrong, but I think fascism is economically syndicalist. But the difference between syndicalism and Kaiserreich and fascism, as Mussolini had envisioned, is that in Mussolini's state, the trade unions would be subject to the state rather than the trade unions making up the state and its operations like syndicalists in Kaiserreich do. And even though they aren't syndicalists in the way that the trade unions actually have power, it's still economically based in unions and collaboration of unions in the state. It's just a matter of who has the power in the state. So maybe it doesn't make sense that they're like left communist, but if fascism be corporatist, yeah. So there's a thing about corporatism is that it's not necessarily corporatocracy. So hold on, I need to actually write this down. I'm going full like going full political YouTuber now. I don't know, what is this? So I'm not going to use this font though. I'll use my usual Tahoma. So there's corporatism and there's corporatocracy. These are different. Corporatism is that there's a body of a state or something that you are swearing obedience to, and that is fascism. But corporatocracy is not corporatism, right? Corporatocracy is like the big corporations run the government. And there's a little bit of a nuance here, because there were big corporations that were supporting fascism, but it was kind of like a dual authority thing, where the party would be like, hey, you need to do this or else, while also these people were funding them. So these people were funding these people thinking that they'd get it, but then the fascists just turn around and start dictating what they need to do, right? But then there's syndicalism. Syndicalism is when there's a trade union and they decide how they want to run the place. I wish I could find that like really famous picture of the all the people banned. Here, I have it here in Kaiserreich. If you look here, there's a very famous depiction of the socialists here, right? Everyone's banding together with their fist up to form a bigger fist. And this is the idea of syndicalism, uniting together under a bigger idea to then push up against the power. That's the socialist, more wholesome version of what syndicalism should be. But in a way, a syndicalist trade union is still a corporation. What do you mean corporation? I thought corporations were only monetary things. Corporation just means a body, corpus. It's just a body. It's not actually a real thing. Like, there's no Apple. There's the places that are controlled by the Apple Corporation, but you cannot touch Apple. You can't touch the state of Florida. You can't touch the trade union. You can only interact with a agreed upon corpus of what it is. And okay, this is a little unfortunate. We'll just change this here. So this is a corpus. This is the trade union. This is the money corp. This is the state. Corporatism goes, let's take all these things. Fascism is like, all these are really just the same thing and they all need to work together. And that's what the fasces represent with this big axe here. The idea is that everyone bands together and keeps the thing stable and unified for the benefit of all. But then that's just bullshit, because then they take over and they dictate everything that the trade union, the people above, they control everything. And that really sucks. I don't like fascism. Fascism really sucks. I don't like fascism. But this is the interesting thing that comes when you have a timeline where there's a socialist revolution in Italy. I'm going to just go back to the start date so that we don't have to look at all this stuff. There's a lot of talk here. I didn't see it all. Corporatist is class collaborationist. Yeah, so I'll talk about that element too right now, actually. So just to make sure that we're all on the same page. So in a syndicalist society as it is in Kaiserreich, there are a bunch of people that are in a trade union. This trade union could be a steel worker. This trade union could be a textile. Then these leaders of all the trade unions go up to the government and are like, this is how the government should be run, right? It goes up in a class and then if there's a capitalist that controls the factory, they don't exist anymore. Goodbye, right? But in a fascist society that Mussolini had depicted, instead of it only being the workers that have ability to represent themselves in government, you have the union of the workers, and then you have the union, or there's the upper class guy up here who has like the ability to control this, but both of them have to be controlled by the government. So it's not that they go up, it's that they go down. This controls everything. We don't want this. This sucks. We hate totalitarianism. But do you see the similarities in the structures here? Like it's really abstract, and you should definitely look up this more from somebody who has a little bit more understanding. This is just my understanding of how it is. But I'm going to open up Kaiserreich, and I'm going to see if I can look at the socialist Italians a little more. Hold on, let's see here. General economic practices have some in common with the modern state capitalism. Yeah, because it's more class collaborationist. There are people who exist that have more wealth than others, but they shouldn't not exist as long as they're productive and they don't. My cat was eating my sticker. That's interesting. Anyway, so it's class collaborationist rather than just workers only. That's a difference of the ideology of fascism, not necessarily how it was practiced, especially not in Nazi Germany. That was a whole other thing, a lot less like it. But they were talking about Mussolini's ideal, this fascist revolution. I'm reading a bunch of chat because you guys talked a lot. So he didn't necessarily want to unionize the bourgeois, but he wanted to subjugate the bourgeois. There was this idea of marrying the proletariat and the nation. And that is what fascism was trying to do. Corporatocracy is just capitalism with a large corporation dominating the economy. Yes. So, where is it? Did it not show up here? The American Caesar. This is corporatocracy. This is not corporationism. This is corporationism. It's not fuck. Well, I need to look at my own notes because I think I'm misspeaking. This Premiere, I don't want to show that. Photoshop. So corporatocracy. This is Caesar. Because there's like big magnates in the corporations that are supporting the dictatorship. Corporatocracy, corporatism. This is fascism. This is national populist. This is Mussolini's totalism. This is what's his face? Turtleneck Man. Mosley's totalism. This is corporatism. Yeah, just different routes. Yeah, exactly. Michel Belanchi follows a Sankerprolismo. Yeah. That's a good. I'll look that up. Thanks. Sansepolcrismo. So there's this. I don't know if I want to signal boost this guy, so I won't say the way I was going to. But the word for union in Italian, I believe, is fascio. So fascism is just unionism, but that's not the reality. But the idea is a unification of everything, not just the workers, or having the workers put their faith in the vanguard party. But they have some similarities that I hope I've illustrated. Nat Path also mentioned corporatism. Yeah, so the reason why that is the case is because national populism has always been kind of a big catch-all in Kaiserreich, and doesn't necessarily actually show everything properly. I don't know if this shows here. Break the banks from camps to factories. I haven't even played this yet, so I don't know for sure. Green tinted democracy. I really want to take a look at this. I want to play Romania now. But like in Brazil, yeah, I don't know. I'm out of specific references to the way totalism is specific. But I hope that you guys enjoyed that little political sidetrack. Let's see if we can incorporate this into our mapping project here before we run out of energy. So I'm actually gonna drink a coffee here for a sec. Okay, yeah, that's what I thought. It was bad. It is a bad example of that dynamic, but it is a good example in the way that national populists aren't just its own ideology. It's like a catch-all term to describe a bunch of things, like Huey Long, who would probably actually be more corporationism instead of corporatocracy, but there's still some similarity. Pietro Nenni, big friends with Mussolini, became a fascist for a short bit before leaving because too right-wing, leading the Socialist Party. Awesome. This is really good stuff. Thank you, guys. Pietro Nenni. At this point, I might as well just make my own Krasnacht thing. But I have too many projects, like the Tommy K video, the Tommy K lore mega campaign, the Towns in Twilight, Hearts of Iron 4 mod. There's way too many things, and then all these videos. But like, this is getting to be a pretty interesting dynamic. And then understanding the Italian socialist variant allows us to consider where it could be prominent. So keep in mind that this thing I'm about to say is only based off of like what I know from like TNO's depiction of the Angolan partisan difference, so take it with a grain of salt. But this could be totalist versus syndicalist here, and then this could be either totalist or syndicalist. How is Mexico? I think that Mexico is just going to be socialists. I'm not sure if there's any other real reason for them to be. Pitted project, yeah, I know. And then like people just come up to me and have good ideas, and I want to incorporate them. And there's also collaboration opportunities that I've had. And on top of that, it's also summertime. You got to spend time with the family and stuff. It's just there's a lot. But I hope that everybody is enjoying this stream. I'm really enjoying this one. Have a group of syndicalists, specifically the Russian exiles, combine syndicalism with Trotskyite ideals to bring what's it, like Trotskyite Russians just as like a little volunteer group going and stirring shit up in Africa? That seems like it'd be fun. I don't know if Trotskyism would ever have any relevance in this timeline, but Cristero revolt occur. You mean in Mexico? Maybe. That could be an interesting proxy conflict, but isn't it a little too close to home? I don't know. Maybe. Labor imperialism could be explained by the colonies having to go through feudalism, capitalism, communism, socialism. Yeah. And there's like an interesting scenario where all these African European exiles would need to industrialize to make guns, but then they wouldn't want to give it to the factories to the people that they're actively oppressing. So it's almost like this could only turn into a third international line thing later. But then there's a lot of Muslim people, I'm not entirely sure, in this area. So this could be Cairo Pact, Pact, and just deal with it that way. But this could be, these both could be NatPop and directly aligned with Russia, which means how is Russia going to get here? They can't. The easiest way to be break through here, but they can't do that. More easy way maybe to do this, but what is going on here? We need to make this a big road stop, or like a potential weak point that the socialists can intervene in. And a way that they could do that is having the Cairo Pact fighting Iran, so that these people aren't going to allow them just to make a big railroad and a naval base so that they can reach their allies down here. Lenin himself wanted to industrialize the Russian worker state with the help of a hypothetical German worker state. Yes, I have an entire video series, like a 3-hour-long idea of what if the Soviet Union managed to conquer northern Germany through a little bit of realpolitik by Trotsky, which leads to him becoming leader of the Soviet Union. Iran corridor? I mean, having an actual Iran corridor of Russia would be insane. But having Iran be somehow subjugated to Russia is more reasonable. I thought about doing a video making a map of how I would do 1984. I don't know. I think 1984 is more of a thought experiment than an actual alternate history, but it could be interesting to look into. Okay, cool. That's good. I'm glad you watched it. I hope you enjoyed it. Internal structure with syndicalists and totalists. Yeah, that could be a good opportunity for Mexico to have a problem. Italy could support and agitate French syndicalists. Yeah, we'll use a 2 of 2. Let me see. Divisions between the French syndicalists. Most French socialists became fascist, since France is very internationalist. Italy could support and agitate French totalists and national syndicalists. Yeah, so I talk about this in the LoreGrave video. Mussolini, this is going to be totalist. This is going to be syndicalist. Both of them want a European Union. They need to reform each other without pissing off each other. Either they go full syndicalist or they go full totalist. I don't know exactly how that would happen, but they're going to have some sort of synchronization or reform that makes it so that they can actually integrate everybody. So there's already that element in Mussolini. I don't know, in Turtleneck Man, I don't know his actual name. Mosley. Mosley would be doing that here, more so than Mussolini. But if Mussolini's successor gets in power and then they just go full totalist, and maybe there's no European Union. Maybe it's just a bunch of nationalists, but maybe they're too divided, and then that's the perfect opportunity for Savinkov to march in. Oh my God, you're totally right. Ethiopia. And then, because I think there's even some sort of sympathy that Orthodox Russians would have for the Copts, because they might be more religiously related than Catholics. I could be wrong. Should probably just set this up to loop, but I trained myself to know when that playlist ends. Sorel was critical of following Marx blindly. Wouldn't that exist, leading to a chunk of the syndicalists trying to expand the revolution to Africa, regardless of what Marx said? Yes, I think that there would be a lot of communists in Africa that would revolt, and they would be pro Third International without necessarily being a syndicalist and acknowledging the material conditions that they're in. And the French would also acknowledge that, but they would still probably approach it in the sense that they would need to heavily industrialize these countries. But that's already what the Phalantisserie does in Kaiserreich, and it already exists. So like, yeah, they just work together. There's maybe a decision to help get some factories going or something. Yeah, but that all tracks. Yeah. I don't know why in the United States collapses and you go into civil war. I don't know why in the universe this way the United States collapses and you go into civil war. Are you not familiar with Kaiserreich? It's a pretty iconic part of Kaiserreich, even if it might be not that plausible, or however you'd like to describe it. So this is all really interesting Middle East, Africa stuff, and I'll be talking about that for sure. No idea what to do here. I like the idea of having a socialist problem in Mexico. I think that I will have, I think I will have the Algeria be controlled by French reactionaries, but even if they don't, it could be like totalist Algerians, which then could face a Pied Noir revolt. And if they actually manage to control Algeria, the economy of France might want to intervene directly, but then at that point the Russians might be guaranteeing them. So it's another point where, especially if they have access to Turkey, Russia could just go in and naval invade, open up a second front. There's a lot of good geopolitical stuff here when Russia has the ability to leave the Baltic and the Black Sea. So, wouldn't Trotskyism be stronger in Kaiserreich? Well, if I understand the problem with Trotskyism correctly, is that Trotsky changed his mind at different points in history. And the reason why that there's a bunch of people who are Trotskyists and they're unified in one ideological thing and then they break apart is because they're citing different things that Trotsky said at different points of time, which then makes them split over who's the real Trotskyite. And that could just be a Marxist-Leninist telling me why Marxist-Leninism is a lot better than Trotskyite, but it seems like an actual pattern in the sense that Trotsky's ideas would be like of at least permanent revolution. Yes, his ideas of permanent revolution would be more accurate, but is it more that his ideas of permanent revolution were adapted from Marx that he specifically really latched onto, or is permanent revolution his idea? And if permanent revolution was his idea, why are they accepting peace with the Russians when they could, with the industry that they have, defeat the Russians? I don't know. Trotskyite could be interesting here, but it's like the same thing. This is the thing I have a problem even with TNO. Like, Mao barely even got to write any theory because he died in the Japanese invasion. But you have several different leaders who, in our history, they read Mao and they're Maoistic. But now they're just referencing this Mao guy who failed in a communist revolution against the Japanese. Like, why? It's the same thing with Krasnacht. They were like, oh, well, Leninism wouldn't be discredited. Yes, it would. Like, oh, you tried doing a revolution in a feudal country and it failed. Okay, like, yeah, great. You have good ideas and we'll bring you onto the Syndicalist party if they had the option. But they probably wouldn't because he hated Syndicalism. So it's just like, yeah, whatever, Lenin, go away. And then it gets rid of the interesting things that we can explore by doing it this way. So I almost want to like distance myself from our history our history ideological thinkers like Trotsky, Stalin, Mao, and Lenin. Wouldn't Greece get Aegean coast after Desert War? Yeah, because they could. Yeah, right. Okay. That's a good point. I totally forgot about that. Oh, you still? Really? Oh, I'm sorry, everyone. There. I hope that's better. I had that feedback earlier. Yeah, that's a good point. If the Ottomans lost this hard, then maybe the Greeks own at least the Aegean coast, and then that could be an interesting dynamic too. Give Greece Constantinople. They always get Constant. I don't know if I want that. Maybe. But then if we give them Constantinople, maybe even the Strait too, like this, and they're already a Russian ally, then that might be too much of a buff. There's also the element of Bulgaria potentially getting involved. I'm not entirely sure. There's a certain dynamic here that we have with Bulgaria. Oh, I have to change this note color. With Bulgaria, Greece, and Turkey that we can really look into regarding this region in particular and how Russia would interact with them. It's interesting if Kemalism is in Turkey, then they're actually more Russia aligned than Greece would be, especially if they're a monarchy. But maybe there could be a Greek civil war between socialists and like metaxists. Give Russia Constantinople. That's the correct. that's the play. What will the USA do in Krasnacht? Well, it's really hard to determine what we'll do with America, and I think this is the last topic of the day. I like all this talk about the Turkey situation, and I will reference this when I get to writing the script again. But I do want to talk about America, before we conclude the stream. So I read a bunch of the events for the USA in Kaiserreich. In the USA's Kaiserreich Constitution, it says that it's self-defeating. The purpose of the state is to remove the state after socialism is developed enough to go to communism, where communism is supposed to be a classless society. And therefore not have any state. And the thing is that the resources that America has and the industry that America has, they probably could do that. But then, is it the done thing to do to just ignore Russia? Shouldn't the revolution be able to happen over the world before we try anything like this? There's an ideological debate between syndicalists and totalists. The totalists want it to probably just be like industrialized heavily. The syndicalists are like, we could just isolate ourselves and do it ourselves. But then there's the internationalism of wanting to be friends with France. In Krasnacht's original outline, they actually had the idea where these people would break. There'd be like a American European split. And what's the ideological thing that would cause the Europeans and the Americans to split? Maybe the Americans are just anarchists. So you have the syndicalists and totalists here trying to determine what's going to work. You might have some totalists here being like, oh, it should be like this. But then the syndicalists and the anarchists are like, actually, America's culturally actually really inclined to having federal whatever. So we shouldn't even be involved at all. But then it's like, okay, you're taking the biggest resource-rich power country in the world, the oil that would be able to be used to support all this, and then making them isolationist. Doesn't make any sense. So then the other idea I had was to actually make them a direct war here, where the Pacific states and the British Columbians are fighting together over here and fighting the Americans. And it's like, well, what do we do here, right? Like, are we actually going to have this? It made more sense when the Japanese were a big threat, but we were just talking about how we should make China a proxy conflict for Russia to have to deal with. So is this what the Russians are supporting? The Russians are going to support the Pacific states, which is interesting. But then, like, what is the national populist Pacific states? They have more ideological similarities to Longists than the Pacific states. But maybe that is an element that gets incorporated somehow. We're not entirely sure, but it could be pretty interesting. Councilist, hold on. A communist splits off with international. U.S. ideology similar to Trotsky would take hold in the U.S. would expand the revolution. I mean, maybe. Branchway ideology for America, potentially, and I think that Gurley Flynn's anarcho-syndicalist makes a lot of sense in this case, because it's syndicalist, it's anarchist, it takes the elements that we know from American culture of having a federative model based off of liberty. Like, here's the thing. The Second Amendment still exists. Well, actually, it doesn't technically exist in the way that it's depicted in the Kaiserreich events. But everybody still has guns. And Marx had even said that the workers should never give up their guns. Never. He actually said that. Lenin disagreed. He asked everyone to give their guns voluntarily. And I don't know what happened to all the people who didn't. Maybe they were labeled a white movement. But anyway, so it's likely that they would actually just be extremely isolated from the Third International. That's not to say that there wouldn't be people in America who would want to support the Third International. That's not to say that the Americans would not be trading with the Third International. Maybe the Americans would only join the Third International in their fight against Russia if it's defensive. But maybe they just don't do that at all. Maybe they're too focused on trying to perfect their own state that they just go complete isolationist. And then, I don't know. It kind of seems in line with the way that America even worked in the Second World War, where they were isolationist for the entirety until something happened that made them have to get involved. I would have the America split socialist than just yeah, I think so too. Central American conflict in Guatemala, yeah, maybe. Dixie communes that have guns, different ideas in Chicago, yeah, and then that's another ideological problem. If you have, like, you need to reconstruct the South. You can't just give all states' rights back to the people who ran the states in the South, because you know what they did with that. So then it's like, okay, well then there should be new states. Okay, well, how are we dividing these new states? I'm certainly not depicting that. That's going to be a real pain in the ass trying to make. And then, would it even be states? There wouldn't be states. It would be just one central government, and the government tells everyone what to do and how to not have a government anymore. And then it's like, well, that doesn't make any sense. And then totalists could come in power in America. And then, I don't know, there's a lot that could go on here. American exceptionalism is syndicalism. Yeah, maybe. The old world bloc. Yes, I do. But what about it? I have them depicted over here. Universe in this mod, Ottomans 1, and be able to restore and dominate half of Greece. Yes, but in this timeline, I'm having them not exist as a big force. Maybe I could reconsider that, but I like the idea of the Cairo Pact more. Now here's the interesting thing. Yeah, Bauder wanted an autonomous black belt, but he's a totalist in Kaiserreich. He would still be operating from the perspective of that there needs to be a separate governmental authority. But the anarcho-syndicalist ideal dictates that there shouldn't even be a problem. If people are able to associate in their local communities at the county level, there should never need to be an autonomous black belt, because the black belt would already be autonomous. And I think that the fact that we are having such a problem determining America's future, that it shows that America, in the way that Kaiserreich depicts its anarcho-syndicalist society, would not be able to function, in the sense that they would be so caught up on debates that they wouldn't be able to determine their path. Meaning that it might not actually work out, and there could be some political struggle that happens between totalists and all that stuff. Maybe there's another civil war. Why not, right? Fascism exists, just not in the way that you would imagine it, because Mussolini stayed a socialist He's not class collaborationist, well, as much as he was in our history. He might actually be adopting those ideas later, but it would always be from a perspective of a socialist. Yellow socialism in America, like yellow syndicalism? Maybe. Yeah, USSA style America seems like it would be the best bet. And Twilight Struggle definitely got that right. But I don't know if I really wanted to copy Twilight Struggle too much. Marx and Buchanan, yeah, it'll never end, yeah. Yeah, I see this idea about Brazil and lusotropicism. I think it would make sense to have Brazil be integralist and start getting involved in the Old World Pact. Maybe supporting the Portuguese in exchange for them being subjugated to the Brazilians. Have a royal marriage between the two cadet dynasties. Could work. I definitely will do that, actually, before I forget. Is there a monarchist Brazil thing here? But yeah, after I map out this monarchist Brazil, I think I'm going to wrap up the stream. If you guys are watching the VOD or you have more ideas right now, please leave a comment. I would love to hear your ideas, because there's a lot of really good ideas that have been shared here today. I will not do the internal subdivisions. I'll just do this. I really like the ideas that we've had for Brazil. I like how we talked about the ideological aspects of syndicalism and how it's related to fascism, but not necessarily fascism. A lot of good stuff, a lot of productiveness, a lot of things to talk about in a second video. It's hard to even know what the scope of it will be because of how much there is that I wanted to discuss. But yeah. Green, yeah. The monarchist color is green, so they're going green. They're probably going to be expanded too. It would be cool if there is that. I know that there's an outcome where the Patagonian state here of France, the monarchy here is restored, and then something happens here. I don't know what. But we could have that really wacky Brazil, and then this Brazil could be like, we're a monarchist, but we have a lot in common with Savinkov, who is National Republican. So where do we stand, and how are we going to handle this? And then the Americans might be like, this is a perfect opportunity for a socialist revolution. So I'll definitely bring that up. That's at least the primary conflict that'll happen in the Americas. Let's see. You're crazy. Something this mod would make a cell phone like a syndicalist Brazil governed by Pino Saltgo. Yeah, so there's a lot of layers to this. It's a Kaiserreich continuation mod. It's Krasnacht, but there's certain core aspects of Krasnacht that I can't get rid of. So there's a lot of like weird restrictions. So having somebody not understand anything about it, yeah, I imagine it would be really confusing. And maybe I am crazy. Why doesn't have France home West Africa? Because I'm not sure if they should have it or not, but maybe they do. I'm not entirely sure yet. Monarchist Brazil, exiled France. Yes, I think that's what we're going to be doing. Patagonian Workers' Front to win in Argentina, and then have a war between the Brazilians and Integralists. Yeah, then maybe that's the easiest way to go about it. So either we have a full Brazilian victory, or the Patagonian Workers' Front unites, and then we could have the like Andesia idea of them taking over all of the Andes. I rather have the ACC and Royalist Canada. If you play cards right, you can make a third faction. I mean, yeah, it could be, but I also like the idea of like the European Africans like trying to rebrand themselves after the collapse. It could be cool. It could be interesting. Brazilian Entente leadership. Yeah, I can see the Brazil almost leading the Entente in this situation. Exiled French monarchy restoration. Yeah, maybe. Action Francais, France. Makes a lot of sense to me. Where would the Pope even be? Like, is there even a canon event for where the Pope goes in this event? Because it seems to me like they're going to Brazil. So the Pope is in Brazil. Okay, so now I'm really gonna wank Brazil in this timeline, I guess. Brazil's the leader is housing the Catholic Church. They're supporting the French monarchy, the Portuguese monarchy, the British monarchy, and the German monarchy, and being a dominant state in South America. It might be that instead of having the Patagonian Workers' Front unite and then having a proxy conflict, they could just be like the last bastion of reactionarism. Pope flees to Nepal because the Pope can go to any Catholic non-Sindhi nation. Okay, well, in that case, I really want them to go to Brazil. Papal Brazil with Portuguese colonies is peak. Yeah, I agree. They should. He could go to Poland. Oh, okay. That's actually really interesting. I actually really like that idea, because if the Pope is in Poland and the Polish are Republican, and the legitimacy of the integralist Brazilians comes from papal legitimacy, and then the new Pope comes along, and they're like, actually no monarchies anymore, or whatever, or integralism is stinky, and you should follow the national populist Russian line. It's like, wait, what? And then maybe that's a problem for Brazil. Maybe they have a civil war between monarchists and national populists and socialists. But Brazilian Pope seems really fun. I understand, go for it, and Tino Kaiserreich. Yeah, I would like to see that. You can send it in the Discord. Would anyone find it interesting? Syndicalist Brazil, governed by Primo Salgado. And yeah, that could be interesting too, but I don't know. This whole like integralism Brazil thing, having the ideological conflict between monarchies, seems really interesting to me. Yeah, new schism. Yeah, it could be a Brazilian Pope. Like, I know there's like Sadavantagonists or whatever they are. There's like certain Catholics that believe all popes after a certain point are heretical and therefore not authorities. So it could be a split along those lines. Catholic balance of power could be fun, definitely, because the Russians would want to use the Catholic powers and influence to be able to mess with the Third International. So, like, isn't this really awesome? This is exactly what Krasnacht should be. There's so much depth to the scenario that you can really just keep going, diving down further and further. I can't believe it. It's so much fun. Maybe there's even going to be a third part of this, but at the very least, after the second part of this video, we're definitely going to go and talk to the Twilight Struggle developers, and that's a video after this one that's coming next. Okay, well, yeah, thank you everyone again so much for watching. This has been a really productive stream. If you have any ideas about this, you can leave it in the comments of this video, in the video on demand. You can go to my Discord. I'll see if I can open up a Krasnacht Ideas submod right now. And yeah, I'll open it right now, and then I'll link to it somewhere. Well, I guess there's the LoreGrave discussion. Yeah, just go into LoreGrave. I'll post this VOD there too. But yeah, Scandinavia, I don't know, it might be neutral. But yeah, anyway, thank you very much everyone for watching, and really fun today.